I'm Emma, 29 years old, standing in the stunning garden pavilion at my younger sister Victoria's dream wedding. The venue overlooks the Pacific coastline, with white roses cascading from every arch and 250 guests dressed in their finest attire. During the reception toasts, my mother Catherine stands with her champagne flute glinting in the golden hour light, addressing the daughter who has always been her pride and joy. She begins with the expected words about Victoria's beauty and accomplishments, but then her voice takes on an edge I've never heard before. To the daughter, who finally proved blood isn't always thicker than water, she continues, and to revealing that Victoria has been systematically destroying Emma's life for the past 5 years while pretending to be her biggest supporter. The crystal glass slips from my trembling fingers, shattering against the stone floor. 250 faces turn to stare as silence descends like a suffocating blanket. I look at Victoria, resplendent in her $8,000 designer gown, and see something flicker across her face before she masks it with her practiced smile.
Shock?
Panic. And underneath it all, the calculating look I now realize I've been seeing for years without understanding what it meant. This is the moment everything changed. The moment I discovered that my sister, the person I defended, supported, and loved unconditionally, had been the architect of every major disaster in my adult life. Before I tell you how our family imploded that night and the shocking truth I uncovered, I want you to know this story gets deeper than you might expect. If you're here for family drama and justice served, you're in the right place. For as long as I can remember, I've lived in Victoria's shadow. At 27, she was everything I wasn't: effortlessly beautiful, naturally charismatic, and blessed with the kind of luck that seemed to follow her everywhere. Our childhood home in Malibu was a shrine to Victoria's achievements: dance trophies, beauty pageant crowns, academic awards, and photographs from her successful modeling career that had launched when she was just 16. I was the older sister, who worked twice as hard for half the recognition. While Victoria breezed through high school with decent grades and a packed social calendar, I buried myself in books, earning a full scholarship to Stanford where I studied environmental engineering. When I graduated summa cum laude, my parents hosted a small family dinner. When Victoria booked her first major modeling campaign, they threw a party that made the society pages. Emma's always been the serious one, my mother would tell friends, as if being serious were a character flaw. Victoria gets her beauty from me, but her personality from her father, so outgoing and magnetic. The comparison stung, but I told myself it didn't matter. I had my own path, my own successes. After graduation, I landed a position with a prestigious environmental consulting firm in San Francisco, working on sustainability projects for major corporations. I was making a real difference in the world, even if it didn't come with the glamour and attention that Victoria's career provided. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Brennan, had been helping me work through these feelings of inadequacy for the past 2 years. "You've built an impressive career," she reminded me during one of our sessions. "Your work on the Tesla factory sustainability project was featured in 3 major publications. Why do you still feel like you're not enough?" I stared out her office window at the San Francisco Bay, watching sailboats cut through the gray water. It's not that I think I'm not successful. It's that nothing I do ever seems to matter as much to my family as whatever Victoria's doing that week. Despite these feelings, Victoria and I maintained what I thought was a close relationship. We texted daily, met for lunch whenever she was in the Bay Area, and called each other first with both good news and crises. I was genuinely proud of her success and believed she felt the same about mine. When she got engaged to Marcus Chun, heir to a tech fortune and CEO of an emerging AI company, I was thrilled for her. Marcus seemed grounded despite his wealth, and he clearly adored my sister. That's why the past year had been so bewildering. A series of professional and personal disasters had struck with devastating frequency, each one seemingly random but collectively destroying the life I'd built. It started with my promotion to senior project manager being suddenly rescinded after allegations surfaced about my work on a major client's project. The company never gave me details, just vague references to concerns about professional judgment and inconsistencies in project documentation. I was devastated and confused, The project had been one of my greatest successes. Then my relationship with David Kim, a software engineer I'd been seeing for 8 months, ended abruptly when he confessed he'd developed feelings for someone else. "I thought you were the one," he said during our painful breakup conversation at our favorite coffee shop. "But then I realized we want different things. You're so focused on work, and I need someone who can prioritize a relationship." The final blow came when my apartment in Soma was burglarized, but in the strangest way. The thieves had taken my laptop, which contained years of personal projects and research, my backup drives, and several pieces of jewelry with sentimental value. But they'd left expensive electronics and cash visible on my dresser. The police said it was unusual, but not unheard of. Through each crisis, Victoria had been my rock. "That company didn't deserve you anyway," she'd said about the lost promotion. "David clearly wasn't emotionally mature enough for you," she consoled after my breakup. "Insurance will replace everything important," she assured me after the burglary. I threw myself into planning Victoria's wedding as a distraction from my own troubles. She'd chosen Terrania Resort for the ceremony, and despite the eye-watering cost, I was happy to help coordinate details. Planning her dream wedding gave me purpose during a time when my own life felt like it was unraveling. The first sign that something was wrong came during Victoria's engagement party at Marcus's family estate in Pacific Palisades. I was looking for Victoria to ask about seating arrangements when I found her in the study, speaking quietly but intensely into her phone. "No, she still doesn't suspect anything," she was saying. "Just stick to what we discussed. It's almost over anyway." When she noticed me in the doorway, she quickly ended the call and flashed her megawatt smile. "Emma, I was just talking to the florist about the centerpieces. They're being so difficult about the orchid varieties I want." I nodded and let it go. Wedding planning was stressful, and Victoria had always been a perfectionist about events. If she was being secretive about some detail, it was probably just to maintain an element of surprise. 2 weeks before the wedding, I overheard another suspicious conversation while helping Victoria with dress fittings at our family home. She was in the adjoining room, and I could hear her through the thin wall. "She'll be there, but she won't be a problem much longer," Victoria was saying. "Mom knows what she needs to do." Yes, everything we talked about. When I asked her about it later, she waved dismissively. "Just wedding coordinator drama. Trying to manage all these vendors is giving me a migraine." My grandmother Helen, however, seemed to share my growing concerns. During dinner at her Beverly Hills home 3 nights before the wedding, she studied me carefully over her wine glass. "Emma, darling," she said, setting down her fork. "Has Victoria always been kind to you? Really, truly kind?" The question surprised me. "Of course, Grandma. We have our moments like all sisters, but she's always been supportive." Helen pursed her lips, her silver eyebrows drawing together. "I've watched that girl her whole life, and there's something that's always bothered me. The way she looks at you when she thinks no one's watching." "What do you mean?" "Like she's studying you. Like you're a problem she's trying to solve." I laughed it off, but Helen's words planted a seed of doubt that I couldn't shake. That night, I found myself reviewing recent interactions with Victoria, looking for signs I might have missed. But every memory seemed normal, supportive, loving. The night before the wedding, during the rehearsal dinner at Nobu Malibu, I watched Victoria work the room with her usual effortless charm. She moved between tables like a butterfly, kissing cheeks and accepting compliments on her glowing skin and gorgeous dress. Our parents beamed with pride as guest after guest congratulated them on raising such a beautiful, successful daughter. I was seated between Marcus's college friend and his aunt, nursing my second glass of wine and trying to maintain my smile. The conversation flowed around me, but I felt oddly disconnected from the celebration. At one point, I excused myself to use the restroom and nearly collided with David in the hallway outside. My ex-boyfriend looked uncomfortable in his navy suit, fidgeting with his tie. "Emma," he said, clearly startled. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I'm the maid of honor," I replied coolly. "The question is why you're here." "I didn't know you and Marcus were friends." David shifted uncomfortably. "We're not really. Victoria invited me as her plus one for someone who couldn't make it last minute. Before I could respond, Victoria appeared, linking her arm through David's with practiced ease. There you are. Emma, I see you found David. Wasn't it sweet of him to fill in when Jessica had that family emergency? She smiled brightly, but something in her eyes made my stomach twist. Everyone important should be here for my special weekend, don't you think? The way they stood together sent a chill through me. David couldn't meet my eyes, and Victoria's smile seemed predatory. But I pushed the feeling aside. Tomorrow was her wedding day, and I was determined to be the supportive sister she needed. If only I'd known what my mother would reveal during the reception toasts. The morning of Victoria's wedding dawned clear and perfect, with temperatures in the mid-70s and a gentle ocean breeze. I arrived at the bridal suite at 6 a.m. sharp, carrying coffee and pastries for the bridal party. Victoria was already awake, sitting in her silk robe with her hair in rollers, scrolling through her phone. "Thank God, caffeine," she said, grabbing the largest cup. "The makeup artist is running late, and I've already had 3 vendor crisis calls." I began organizing the jewelry and accessories while the other bridesmaids slowly arrived. Despite being Victoria's sister, I wasn't her maid of honor. That honor had gone to Jessie, her former roommate and fellow model. Victoria had explained that she needed me free to handle the important behind-the-scenes coordination. As the morning progressed, Victoria became increasingly demanding. She criticized the makeup artist's foundation choice, made the hairstylist redo her updo twice, and snapped at Jessie for suggesting a different lipstick shade. "Not those earrings, Emma," she said sharply when I offered her the pearl studs our grandmother had given her as a wedding gift. "I'm wearing the diamonds Marcus gave me. The pearls look so outdated." I bit my tongue and made the switch. The pearls were meant to be her something old, but it was her day. About an hour before the ceremony, Victoria pulled me aside into the private dressing area, away from the chattering bridesmaids. "I just wanted a moment with just us," she said, suddenly seeming vulnerable. "You're my big sister, Emma. I wouldn't be who I am without you." For a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to sneak into my room during thunderstorms, and I felt a rush of affection. I hugged her carefully, mindful of her hair and makeup. "I'm so happy for you, Vic," I said sincerely. "Marcus is lucky to have you." She pulled back and studied my face with an odd expression. "You've always been too good, Emma," she said softly. "Too trusting." Before I could ask what she meant, our mother burst in, announcing it was time for the dress, and the moment was lost. The ceremony was breathtaking. 300 guests filled the terraced garden overlooking the ocean, with white chairs arranged in perfect rows and an arch of cascading roses framing the altar. I stood with my parents in the front row, watching Victoria glide down the aisle on our father's arm, looking like she'd stepped out of a fairy tale. As Marcus recited his heartfelt vows about loving Victoria's adventurous spirit and unwavering loyalty, I noticed David sitting about halfway back on the groom's side. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. What was he doing on the groom's side if Victoria had invited him as her plus one? During the cocktail hour on the Ocean View Terrace, I observed several strange interactions. David seemed unusually comfortable with Marcus's friends, laughing and sharing inside jokes as if he'd known them for years. Victoria, making her rounds through the crowd, stopped to speak with him for what seemed like an inappropriately long time for someone who was supposedly just filling in for an absent guest. I was distracted from these observations when my mother cornered me by the champagne bar, already on her 3rd glass. "You look lovely, Emma," she said, adjusting my bridesmaid dress with critical fingers. "Though a bit more makeup wouldn't have hurt. You look tired." "Thanks, Mom," I replied dryly. 60-hour work weeks will do that." She sighed. "Such demanding hours. I still think you should have gone into marketing like Victoria suggested. More flexible schedule, better work-life balance." I took a large sip of champagne rather than responding. This was an old argument. "Will you be saying anything during the toasts?" she asked suddenly. "No, Jessie's giving the maid of honor speech. I wasn't asked to prepare anything." My mother frowned. "That doesn't seem right. You're her sister." "It's fine, Mom. It's her wedding, her choice." "Well, I'll certainly be mentioning you in my toast, she said, patting my arm. There was something strange in her expression, a tension around her eyes that didn't match her smile. The reception was held in the resort's grand ballroom, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sunset over the Pacific. After dinner was served and the cake was cut, it was time for the toasts. Marcus's best man went first with a funny, touching speech about their friendship since college. Jessie followed with an emotional tribute to Victoria, highlighting her beauty, ambition, and fierce loyalty. Marcus's father spoke briefly about welcoming Victoria to their family. Then it was my mother's turn. Catherine rose gracefully, champagne flute in hand. At 55, she was still striking, her highlighted blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon that complemented Victoria's style. When Victoria was born, she began, smiling at my sister, I knew she was destined for greatness. There was an intensity in her eyes, a determination that told me she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted in life. Polite laughter rippled through the crowd, and I settled in for what I assumed would be several minutes of Victoria worship. But then my mother did something unexpected. She turned to look directly at me, her expression suddenly serious. To the daughter, who finally proved blood isn't always thicker than water, she continued, and to revealing that Victoria has been systematically destroying Emma's life for the past 5 years while pretending to be her biggest supporter. My champagne glass shattered against the floor. The entire ballroom fell silent, 300 pairs of eyes darting between me, my mother, and Victoria at the head table. What? Marcus said, turning to his new wife with confusion. Victoria's face had gone pale. Mom's had too much to drink, she said with a forced laugh. She doesn't know what she's saying. But my mother wasn't finished. I found the emails, Victoria. The ones to Emma's client spreading lies about her project management. I know you deliberately pursued David to break up their relationship. I've seen the receipts for the locksmith you hired to get into Emma's apartment. Gasps and murmurs spread through the ballroom like wildfire. I sat frozen, unable to process what I was hearing. For years, my mother continued, her voice breaking, I ignored the signs because I thought you just needed more attention. But watching you plan this wedding while continuing to sabotage your sister, I can't stay silent anymore. Victoria stood so quickly her chair toppled backward. This is insane. Mom is clearly having some kind of breakdown. Dad, do something. My father looked shell-shocked, his mouth opening and closing without sound. I found my voice. Is it true? I asked Victoria directly. She whirled to face me, her eyes blazing. Don't be ridiculous. Mom's jealous that all the attention is on me today. She's making this up to ruin my wedding. But I could see it in her face, the flash of calculation, the absence of genuine shock or outrage. In that moment, I knew my mother was telling the truth. Without another word, I stood and walked out of the ballroom, my legs carrying me automatically through the French doors and onto the moonlit terrace. Behind me, I could hear chaos erupting, Victoria's continued denials, Marcus's confused questions, guests whispering urgently to each other. I found a stone bench overlooking the ocean and sank onto it, my mind racing to process everything I'd just learned. The promotion, David, my apartment, none of it had been bad luck or coincidence. It had all been Victoria, deliberately destroying my life while pretending to support me. Are you okay? A voice asked. I looked up to see a woman about my age with Marcus's dark hair and kind eyes. His sister Jennifer, I realized. We'd met briefly at the engagement party. Not really, I admitted. She sat beside me, maintaining respectful distance. I always suspected something was off about Victoria. Marcus was so in love. He couldn't see it, but I saw how she operated. You believe what my mother said? Jennifer nodded slowly. I've watched Victoria manipulate situations since they started dating. She has a way of making herself look perfect while others take the fall. I wiped away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. I don't understand why. What did I ever do to her? Some people can't stand seeing others happy, Jennifer said simply. Especially family members they think have something they want. As we sat in the ocean breeze, the sounds of the disrupted reception filtering through the open windows, I made a decision. I wouldn't cause more of a scene tonight, but I would find out exactly what Victoria had done. I would gather evidence and make sure she faced consequences for her actions. Little did I know how deep the betrayal went, or how it would ultimately transform not only my relationship with Victoria but my understanding of our entire family. The days following Victoria's wedding were a blur of confusion, anger, and determination. I checked into a hotel that night, unable to face going home to my parents' house where I'd been staying while apartment hunting after the burglary. The next morning, I called my grandmother Helen. "I wondered when you'd call," she said. "Come stay with me. Your old room is ready." Helen lived in a beautiful Spanish-style house in Beverly Hills, close enough to my office, but far enough from my immediate family to give me space to think. When I arrived with my suitcase, she opened the door before I could knock. "I always knew something wasn't right about that girl," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of Chanel No. 5 and jasmine. "Your mother finally found her backbone, though her timing could have been better." Over tea and Helen's famous lemon cookies, I learned that the wedding reception had descended into chaos after I left. Victoria had managed to convince some guests that Catherine was having a nervous breakdown, possibly due to stress or early-onset dementia. Marcus had looked stunned throughout, but had stood by his new wife. They'd left for their honeymoon in Bora Bora as scheduled, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. "Your father called this morning," Helen told me. "He's trying to smooth things over, says your mother was overwhelmed and misspoke." "Do you think that's true?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Helen snorted. "Catherine has many faults, but confusion isn't one of them. If she said what she said, she had evidence." My phone had been buzzing constantly with texts and calls from family, friends, and wedding guests. I ignored most of them, responding only to my supervisor at work to request a few personal days. "Take the week," she said kindly. "And Emma, for what it's worth, I never believed those complaints about your work. Your track record speaks for itself." Those words strengthened my resolve. If my mother was right, and my gut told me she was, then Victoria had been systematically undermining me for years while pretending to be my loving sister. I needed to understand exactly what she'd done, and I needed proof. Jennifer Chin proved to be an unexpected ally in my investigation. She texted me the day after the wedding. "If you want to know more about what your sister's been up to, I have information that might help. Coffee tomorrow?" We met at a quiet cafe in Beverly Hills. Jennifer was dressed casually in jeans and a simple blouse, her hair in a practical ponytail, a stark contrast to Victoria's always perfect appearance. "Marcus doesn't know I'm meeting you," she said after we'd ordered. "He's upset about what happened at the wedding, but I think he's also scared there might be truth to what your mother said." "What do you know?" I asked directly. Jennifer pulled out her laptop. "Victoria left this at our parents' lake house last month. She asked me to ship it to her, but I looked at it first because I've been worried about Marcus." What Jennifer showed me was devastating. Victoria had failed to log out of several accounts, leaving behind a digital trail of her manipulations. There was a fake email account she'd been using to communicate with my former client, feeding them false information about my work quality and suggesting I'd been cutting corners on environmental assessments. "Your company didn't fire you because your actual work was too strong," Jennifer explained. But it was enough to create doubt about the promotion. There were text messages between Victoria and David dating back months before our relationship ended, showing how she'd systematically undermined our connection. Screenshots showed her feeding him doubts about my commitment, even sending him photos of me working late with captions like, "This is what she chooses over you." Most shocking were the receipts and communications related to my apartment burglary. Victoria had hired someone to copy my keys weeks earlier, then arranged for the burglary to target specific items, my laptop with personal projects, backup drives, and jewelry that couldn't be easily replaced. "She kept your laptop," Jennifer said quietly. "I found it hidden in her closet at the lake house, along with some of your jewelry." I felt physically sick looking at the evidence of my sister's betrayal. "I need copies of everything," I said. Jennifer nodded. "I've already backed it up. But Emma, be careful. Victoria is dangerous, and she doesn't like being cornered." Armed with this evidence, I began my own investigation. I contacted David, who initially refused to meet but agreed when I mentioned I'd seen his communications with Victoria. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, looking miserable across the table from me at a Starbucks. "Victoria kept telling me you were probably seeing someone else because of all your work trips. So, instead of talking to me about your concerns, you started an affair with my sister?" David had the grace to look ashamed. "It started as emotional support. She was always there when I felt neglected, always sympathetic. She made it seem like she was trying to help our relationship, but looking back, she was destroying it from the inside." "When did it become physical?" "Not until after we broke up," he said quickly. "But the emotional affair, yeah, that started months before. She convinced me you didn't really love me, that you were just going through the motions." This conversation confirmed what I'd begun to suspect. Victoria's sabotage wasn't limited to a few isolated incidents. It was a systematic pattern that had likely affected more areas of my life than I realized. I reached out to my former client, Dr. Patricia Wells, who ran the environmental consulting firm where the false allegations had originated. After some initial reluctance, she agreed to meet. "We knew something was off about those complaints," Dr. Wells admitted over coffee. "They didn't match your work quality at all. But we had to investigate when they came from someone claiming to be a concerned colleague." "Do you still have the original complaints?" She nodded. "They came from an email address claiming to be from someone who'd worked with you on a previous project. When we tried to verify the source, the email address disappeared." I showed her some of Victoria's fake email accounts, and Dr. Wells's face went pale. "That's very similar to the formatting we received. Emma, I'm so sorry. We should have investigated more thoroughly." At the hospital where I sometimes consulted on environmental health projects, I had a similar conversation with Dr. Mark Rodriguez about rumors that had circulated about my professional competence. "The source was always vague," he explained. "Someone would mention hearing concerns about your work, but when pressed for details, they'd claim they were just passing along what they'd heard." I also learned that Marcus had been completely unaware of Victoria's actions. Jennifer reported that her brother was struggling to reconcile the woman he'd married with the person described in my mother's toast. "He's been asking questions," Jennifer told me during one of our regular coffee meetings, "about why Victoria always seemed to know so much about his friends' personal lives and why she was always the first to point out their flaws." As I gathered evidence and pieced together the extent of Victoria's manipulation, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted immediate public revenge, to expose her the way she'd been exposed at the wedding. But another part of me, the engineer in me, perhaps, wanted to understand the why behind her actions. My therapy sessions with Dr. Brennan intensified during this period. "What you're describing sounds like more than sibling rivalry," she observed. "The calculated nature of these actions, the complete lack of empathy, the systematic manipulation, these are concerning patterns." "So my sister is a sociopath?" "I can't diagnose someone I haven't met," Dr. Brennan cautioned. "But understanding the psychological underpinnings might help you process this and decide how to move forward." Moving forward, that was the question that kept me awake at night. What did justice look like after discovering your sister had spent years trying to destroy your life while pretending to love you? As August turned to September and Victoria and Marcus returned from their honeymoon to settle into their new Bel Air mansion, I continued building my case. I was determined that when I finally confronted Victoria, she would have no room to deny or manipulate her way out of the truth. What I didn't yet realize was that Victoria's behavior was rooted in family dynamics that went back much further than I'd imagined, and that my mother's revelation at the wedding was just the beginning of secrets that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my family. By mid-September, I had compiled extensive evidence of Victoria's systematic sabotage, but I still didn't understand the deeper motivation. Why would my sister, who seemed to have everything — beauty, success, wealth — go to such lengths to destroy my comparatively modest achievements? To answer this question, I began researching family psychology and personality disorders, spending my evenings in the UCLA library reading about narcissistic family systems and sibling rivalry. I learned about golden child and scapegoat dynamics, where one child receives excessive praise while another is consistently undermined. But these clinical explanations felt incomplete. There had to be more to the story. My grandmother Helen became my closest confidant during this time. Our evening conversations on her garden terrace, surrounded by blooming jasmine and twinkling city lights, often stretched past midnight. One such evening, as September's heat finally began to relent, Helen shared a revelation that would begin to unravel the mystery. "Your mother and her sister had a similar relationship," she said, sipping her evening wine. "Catherine was always jealous of Diana, though she was more subtle about it than Victoria." This was news to me. "Mom has a sister? She's never mentioned her." Helen's eyebrows raised in surprise. "You don't know about Diana? They haven't spoken in over 30 years. Not since before you were born." "What happened between them?" Helen sighed deeply. "Diana was always the more accomplished sister, better grades, more ambitious, more independent. When they both developed feelings for the same man, your father, and he chose Catherine, she made sure to rub it in. Then she systematically turned their parents against Diana, claiming she was trying to sabotage their relationship." The parallels were chilling. "Are you saying my mother did to her sister what Victoria has been doing to me?" "Patterns repeat in families," Helen said quietly. "Especially when the underlying issues aren't addressed. Your mother learned that love and attention were finite resources that had to be competed for." This revelation sent me searching through old family photos and documents stored in Helen's attic. What I found was illuminating, evidence of family dynamics I'd never noticed as a child. In home videos from my childhood, I could see subtle patterns of favoritism. My mother consistently praising Victoria's appearance while criticizing mine, redirecting attention to Victoria whenever I received recognition, making excuses for Victoria's behavior while holding me to higher standards. In one particularly telling video from a Christmas when I was about 10 and Victoria was 7, I received a telescope I'd been wanting for months. My excitement was obvious as I opened it, but the camera quickly panned to Victoria, who looked upset that she wasn't the center of attention. Within minutes, my mother had redirected everyone's focus to Victoria's new dress-up costume, and my telescope was forgotten. "Your mother taught Victoria that getting attention was a zero-sum game," Dr. Brennan observed when I described these discoveries. "If you were receiving positive attention, it meant less for her." Armed with this new understanding, I decided to confront my father. We met at a quiet restaurant in Santa Monica, away from my mother's influence. Robert Harris had always been the family peacekeeper, a gentle architect who avoided conflict at all costs. I'd inherited his analytical mind, but not his tendency to avoid difficult conversations. "Dad," I said after we'd ordered, "I need to know the truth about what's been happening in our family, not just with Victoria, but going back years." He looked uncomfortable, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Your mother was out of line at the wedding, Emma. She'd had too much wine and—" "Stop," I interrupted firmly. "I've seen the evidence. Emails, receipts, witness statements. Mom was telling the truth, and I think you know it." My father's shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked every one of his 60 years. "I suspected Victoria wasn't always kind to you," he admitted quietly. "But I didn't know the extent of it. Why didn't you ever say anything? Do anything?" He stared at his water glass. "Your mother and I don't always agree on parenting. Catherine can be forceful in her opinions. It seemed easier to keep the peace. Even at my expense?" The pain in his voice was evident. "I failed you, Emma. I was so focused on keeping the family together that I didn't protect you the way a father should." As our conversation continued, I learned more about the family dysfunction that had shaped us all. My mother's own insecurities, stemming from her relationship with her sister, had created a toxic environment where Victoria was overindulged and I was expected to understand and accommodate. "There's something else you need to know," my father said hesitantly, "about why your mother was so protective of Victoria." I waited, my heart pounding. "Victoria wasn't planned," he said carefully. "We were having problems in our marriage, and Catherine felt like she needed to prove something. She poured all her energy into making Victoria perfect, maybe to justify the disruption to our lives, or maybe to prove she could be a better mother than her own had been." This explained some of my mother's excessive focus on Victoria, but it still didn't excuse the years of favoritism and neglect I'd experienced. Over the following weeks, my relationship with Jennifer deepened as we both worked to document and understand Victoria's patterns. She shared troubling developments about Marcus, showing me evidence that Victoria had already begun isolating him from friends and family. She's been telling him that his business partner is undermining him, Jennifer explained during one of our meetings, and that his parents are planning to force him out of the company. None of it's true, but Marcus is starting to become paranoid. I recognized the pattern immediately. Classic divide and conquer. She did the same thing to me with David, making him feel like I didn't prioritize our relationship. As I pieced together the complex family dynamics that had enabled Victoria's behavior, I struggled with how to respond. Simple revenge felt hollow and destructive. I didn't want to become like her or perpetuate the cycle of family dysfunction. During an October walk along Venice Beach with Helen, the ocean breeze carrying the scent of salt and possibility, my grandmother provided the perspective I needed. "Justice isn't about punishment, Emma," she said, linking her arm through mine. "It's about truth and accountability. Victoria has avoided consequences because her actions have been hidden. The most powerful thing you can do is bring everything into the light." This insight shifted my thinking. My goal shouldn't be revenge, but transparency, breaking the cycle of secrecy and manipulation that had poisoned our family for generations. With this clarity, I began developing a comprehensive plan that would expose Victoria's actions while creating opportunities for healing rather than just destruction. I was no longer the naive sister who had stood shocked at a wedding reception. I was becoming an advocate for truth, determined to end patterns of dysfunction that had shaped my family for too long. The plan I developed had 3 phases: documentation, revelation, and protection. First, I would compile irrefutable evidence. Second, I would present this evidence to the family in a controlled setting that allowed for genuine conversation rather than public humiliation. Third, I would work to protect future victims, including Marcus and his family. By November, I had returned to work full-time, my reputation slowly being restored as the truth about the false allegations came to light. My supervisor offered me a promotion to lead a major renewable energy project, and this time I accepted it, becoming the youngest project director in the company's history. While rebuilding my professional life, I continued meticulously organizing evidence of Victoria's deceptions. I created a secure digital archive with folders for each category of manipulation: career sabotage, relationship interference, theft, and family manipulation. Every incident was backed by emails, receipts, witness testimonies, or documented conversations. On the surface, I maintained a careful facade with my family. I began attending Sunday dinners again at my parents' Malibu home, where Victoria and Marcus were often present. I smiled appropriately, asked about their honeymoon, and admired their new house when invited for a housewarming party in November. To anyone watching, it would appear I had moved past the wedding incident and was working to repair family relationships. Victoria seemed relieved by my apparent forgiveness, though I caught her watching me carefully when she thought I wasn't looking. During these gatherings, I noticed concerning signs that her marriage was already showing strain. Marcus was often quiet, his easy smile replaced by a thoughtful frown. Victoria dominated conversations, subtly controlling topics and frequently speaking for her husband. "Marcus and I think the company should expand into European markets," she would say. Or, "Marcus and I have decided not to attend his parents' anniversary celebration." Each time, Marcus would give a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. I recognized that expression. I had worn it myself for years. Thanksgiving dinner became a strategic opportunity to observe and document inconsistencies in Victoria's stories. With my phone discreetly recording in my pocket, I asked innocent questions about her new life. "How's the charity board position going?" I asked, passing her the cranberry sauce. "Exhausting," Victoria said dramatically. The other board members are so disorganized. I'm basically running everything myself. Later, when Marcus mentioned being impressed by the board chair's leadership, Victoria smoothly pivoted. "Oh yes, Margaret is wonderful. I was just telling Emma how efficiently she runs everything. Throughout the meal, I documented at least 6 such contradictions, adding them to my growing file. Meanwhile, my relationship with the Chin family, particularly Marcus's grandmother Susan, was developing in unexpected ways. Susan, a formidable woman in her 70s who had helped build the family's tech empire, had taken an interest in me after the wedding incident. "You remind me of myself at your age," she told me during a chance encounter at a charity function in December. "Smart enough to see through manipulation, brave enough to stand up to it." Through Susan, I learned that Victoria had begun interfering with the family business, suggesting that certain board members were plotting against Marcus and that his parents were considering selling the company without consulting him. "Complete fabrications," Susan said over tea at her Bel Air estate. But Marcus is starting to believe her. He's questioned his father's decisions for the first time in his career and skipped 2 family board meetings. With Jennifer's help, I quietly worked to protect the Chun family business from Victoria's interference, providing Susan with documentation of similar patterns from Victoria's past. It wasn't about revenge, it was about prevention, stopping the cycle before more people were hurt. By early December, I had consulted with Amanda Foster, an attorney specializing in family law and financial crimes, to understand my options. I was careful to frame our discussions hypothetically at first. If someone had systematically used another person's identity and resources to commit fraud over several years, what would the legal ramifications be? I asked during our first meeting. That would depend on the amounts involved and whether the victim wanted to press charges, Amanda explained. It could range from civil proceedings to criminal charges for identity theft and fraud. And if the victim wanted accountability, but not necessarily criminal prosecution of a family member? Amanda gave me a knowing look. There are ways to ensure consequences without involving the criminal justice system. Documented evidence, formal demands for restitution, and the threat of legal action can be very effective. With Amanda's guidance, I refined my 3-phase plan. The most difficult decision was what to do about my mother. Despite her wedding revelation, Catherine had since tried to backtrack, claiming she had been mistaken or overwhelmed by emotion. I decided to give her one chance to make amends by confronting her with the evidence I'd gathered. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant in Beverly Hills, where I showed her a carefully selected sample of the documentation. "This is why you said what you did at the wedding, isn't it?" I asked as she stared at the emails between Victoria and David. "You found out what she was doing." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she pushed the papers away. "I found some things, yes, but Emma, this is family business. It should stay private." Private. I kept my voice level despite my rising anger. Victoria deliberately tried to destroy my career and my relationships. She's been stealing from me and manipulating everyone around her. And now she's doing the same thing to Marcus and his family. "Victoria has always needed more attention, more reassurance," Catherine said defensively. "If you understood her psychology, the pressure she's been under." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted. "Just like you understood when you did the same thing to your sister Diana." Catherine went pale. "That was completely different. Was it? You systematically turned your parents against Diana, just like Victoria has been turning people against me." My mother's response was disappointing, but not surprising. What good would exposing all this do? It would only tear the family apart more than it already is. Can't you just keep your distance from Victoria and move on? In that moment, I realized Catherine would never prioritize healing over maintaining the status quo. The family dysfunction was too entrenched, too normalized. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said, gathering my evidence. "But I can't keep enabling this. What happens next depends on Victoria's willingness to take responsibility." As Christmas approached, I made final preparations for what would serve as the setting for Phase 2 of my plan. The Chin family had invited us all to their estate for Christmas dinner, neutral territory where the truth could finally be revealed in a controlled environment. I understood the risks of what I was about to do. Relationships might be permanently altered. But as Dr. Brennan had helped me understand, the relationships I thought I had with Victoria and my mother had never been real to begin with. They had been built on lies, manipulation, and inequality. The night before Christmas Eve, Helen and I sat by her fireplace, watching the flames dance as a rare Los Angeles rain fell gently outside. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her wise eyes studying my face. "I am," I replied with surprising calm. "This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about truth, accountability, and finally breaking free from patterns that have hurt too many people for too long." Helen reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're braver than I was at your age. I saw what Catherine was doing to you girls, but I didn't intervene forcefully enough. I won't make that mistake again." Christmas Eve arrived with perfect Southern California weather, clear skies, temperatures in the mid-70s, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine from the Chun Estates gardens. The Spanish colonial mansion looked elegant with tasteful white lights and evergreen wreaths, but not ostentatious. I arrived early, having arranged with Susan to help with final preparations. I wore a simple but elegant navy dress with my hair in a sophisticated updo, a deliberate contrast to my usual casual style. The Emma who entered that house was not the same woman who had stood shocked at her sister's wedding 6 months earlier. "You look lovely, dear," Susan said, greeting me in the grand foyer decorated with a 12-foot Christmas tree. "And remarkably composed." "I've had months to prepare," I replied, handing her the bottle of wine I'd brought. "No more surprises, just truth." We worked together to arrange the seating for dinner, strategically placing key players where they needed to be. Marcus's father William at one end of the table, Susan at the other. Marcus and Victoria would sit in the middle of one side with my parents across from them. Jennifer would be next to Marcus, and I would sit beside my father, diagonal from Victoria. As other guests began to arrive, I maintained a pleasant, relaxed demeanor. My father seemed nervous, my mother overly cheerful as she complimented the decorations. Victoria entered like royalty, wearing a designer emerald dress with Marcus following slightly behind, looking handsome but tired in his holiday suit. "Emma," Victoria said, air-kissing my cheek. "Love the dress. Very professional." The familiar subtle insult was delivered with a perfect smile. "Thank you," I replied smoothly. I wanted to look appropriate for such an important evening. Throughout the cocktail hour, I noticed Victoria growing increasingly tense as she observed my easy interactions with the Chin family. Jennifer and I shared several conversations, exchanging knowing glances that clearly unsettled my sister. Marcus seemed to notice too, watching us with curious eyes as he nursed a single glass of wine. Dinner was a masterpiece of holiday elegance, prime rib, roasted salmon, and seasonal vegetables served on the family's antique china. Conversation flowed naturally, though I noticed my mother repeatedly trying to redirect attention to Victoria's recent charity work and away from my new promotion. "Emma, tell everyone about your renewable energy project," Susan prompted during a lull, effectively countering Catherine's efforts. "William was quite impressed when I mentioned your innovation in solar panel efficiency." As dessert was being served, traditional flan alongside Susan's famous tres leches cake, Susan tapped her crystal glass gently. "Before we finish our meal, I'd like to suggest we exchange one special gift each tonight, saving the rest for tomorrow. In my family, we always opened one present on Christmas Eve." There were murmurs of agreement, and Susan's housekeeper wheeled in a cart with a selection of wrapped packages. "I'll start," Susan said, picking up a medium-sized box wrapped in silver paper. "This is for all of us, really, but Emma will do the honors of opening it." I felt Victoria's eyes boring into me as Susan placed the box in my hands. With deliberate calm, I unwrapped it to reveal a sleek tablet. "Thank you, Susan, but I don't understand," I said, playing my part. "It's not just any tablet, dear. It contains a special presentation. My gift to this family is truth." Susan's voice was gentle but firm. "Emma has prepared something I believe everyone needs to see." I opened the tablet, which was already connected to the dining room's hidden projection system. With a single click, the lights dimmed slightly, and a screen descended from a concealed compartment in the ceiling. Marcus looked surprised. Clearly his grandmother had upgraded her technology, without mentioning it. "What is this?" Victoria demanded, her voice tight with apprehension. "Just watch," I said, making direct eye contact with her for the first time that evening. The presentation began with a simple title, a pattern of deception. What followed was a methodically organized display of evidence, beginning with the earliest documented incidents of Victoria's sabotage and progressing chronologically through the years. I narrated calmly as emails, bank statements, text messages, and recorded conversations appeared on the screen. This is from 2019, when Victoria first began interfering with my relationship with David Kim. I began showing the text message threads. Here she is telling him I was seeing someone else while simultaneously telling me he was losing interest. The family watched in stunned silence as the evidence mounted. My father looked increasingly pale, while my mother's face had gone rigid with denial. Marcus stared at the screen with growing horror, occasionally glancing at his wife, whose expression had transformed from indignation to calculation to barely contained rage. This section documents the systematic sabotage of my career. I continued, showing the false email accounts and fabricated complaints. Thanks to my supervisor's intervention and my actual work record, I was able to restore my professional reputation, but the damage could have been career-ending. When I reached the evidence of theft, documentation of the apartment break-in, the stolen laptop and jewelry found in Victoria's possession, and the financial manipulation, Victoria finally erupted. "This is completely fabricated," she declared, standing abruptly. "You've always been jealous of me, and now you're creating fake evidence because you can't stand that I'm successful and happily married." I remained calm. Every document can be verified independently. The bank records are real. The emails can be authenticated by their servers. I haven't fabricated anything, Victoria. "Marcus, we're leaving," Victoria announced. "I won't sit here and be attacked by my delusional sister on Christmas Eve." But Marcus didn't move. "Sit down, Victoria," he said quietly, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I want to see the rest." The most damning evidence came last: documentation of Victoria's recent manipulation of the Chin family business and personal relationships. Emails to board members suggesting William was planning to force Marcus out of the company. Messages to family friends canceling events in Marcus's name without his knowledge. Financial inquiries about the structure of the Chin family trust that Victoria had no legitimate reason to access. As the presentation concluded, there was a moment of complete silence before Susan spoke. "I've conducted my own investigation over the past month," she said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Everything Emma has presented is consistent with what I discovered. Victoria has been attempting to create division in our family, just as she did in hers." "That's not true." Victoria's voice had taken on a desperate edge. "Emma has always been jealous of me. Mom, tell them." All eyes turned to Catherine, who seemed to shrink in her chair. "Victoria has always needed extra attention," she began weakly, but my father interrupted with unexpected firmness. "Stop it, Catherine. No more excuses." What happened next stunned everyone. Jennifer stood and walked to the tablet, inserting a small flash drive. "There's one more piece of evidence you should all hear," she said. The recording that played was a phone conversation between Victoria and my mother, clearly captured without their knowledge and dated just 2 weeks after the wedding. Victoria's voice filled the room. "I can't believe you said that at my wedding. After all these years of covering for me, suddenly you grow a conscience." "I was upset," Catherine's recorded voice replied. "You promised you'd stop after you married Marcus. But then I found out about your inquiries into the Chin family trust. That's different. Marcus deserves to know what his family is really planning behind his back. Besides, Emma had it coming. She always acts so perfect, so much better than everyone else. Did you see her face when she lost that promotion? It was hilarious." Catherine's recorded sigh was heavy with exhaustion. "Just be more careful. If your father ever found out everything you've done—" "He's not even my real father anyway." Victoria's laugh was chilling in its callousness. "So, who cares what he thinks?" The recording ended, and the room erupted into chaos. Victoria lunged for the tablet, but Marcus caught her arm. "Don't," he said, his voice ice-cold. "It's over, Victoria." My mother had buried her face in her hands, while my father sat rigidly upright, his expression a mixture of pain and resolve. "How long have you known?" Victoria demanded, turning to me with pure hatred in her eyes. About your sabotage? Months. About your manipulative patterns? Years, but I didn't want to believe it. About Dad not being your biological father? That was news to me too. Victoria's face went white. What? The room fell silent as everyone turned to look at my father. I raised you as my own, he said quietly. I loved you as my own. But your mother had an affair, and you're not biologically mine. Victoria staggered backward as if she'd been physically struck. You're lying. I'm not, Catherine said quietly, finally finding her voice. And Emma didn't know until recently. This isn't about paternity, Victoria. It's about what you've done. Susan stood, her regal bearing commanding attention. I think it would be best if Victoria left now. William, please have James bring the car around. You can't throw me out, Victoria protested, but her voice had lost its strength. Marcus, tell them. But Marcus was already removing his wedding ring. I'll be staying with my parents tonight. My lawyer will contact you after the holidays about separation proceedings. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. A marriage built on lies isn't a marriage, Marcus said sadly. I don't know who you really are, but I know I can't build a life with someone who could do what you've done. As Victoria was escorted from the room, still protesting her innocence despite the irrefutable evidence, Catherine attempted to follow. Stay, Catherine, my father said firmly. We have a lot to discuss as a family. The remainder of the evening was somber but cathartic. Marcus apologized to me for not seeing Victoria's true nature sooner. My father apologized for years of enabling her behavior. Susan thanked me for protecting her family business. Only my mother remained in denial, alternating between defending Victoria and blaming me for exposing family matters. This wasn't done out of vengeance, I explained to the group as we moved to the living room, leaving the evidence displayed on the dining room table. It was about breaking a cycle that has hurt too many people for too long. Helen, who had been quietly observant throughout the evening, finally spoke. Catherine, you created the same dynamic with your sister that Victoria created with Emma. The difference is that Emma chose to break the pattern rather than perpetuate it. As the night drew to a close with plans made for further family discussions after the holidays, I felt an overwhelming sense of release. The truth was finally out, and while the consequences would continue to unfold, the burden of secrecy had been lifted. I declined Susan's invitation to stay the night, choosing instead to return to Helen's house. As I prepared to leave, Marcus approached me privately. Thank you, he said simply. It would have taken me years to see it on my own, if ever. I'm sorry it had to happen this way, I replied sincerely. He shook his head. Don't be. Better 6 months of painful truth than a lifetime of comfortable lies. As I drove through the quiet streets toward Beverly Hills, I reflected on how different this Christmas had turned out from any I could have imagined a year ago. The family I had known was irrevocably changed, but perhaps now there was a chance to build something healthier from the ruins. 6 months after that transformative Christmas Eve, summer had returned to Los Angeles, bringing with it new opportunities and unexpected healing. The early June morning found me in my corner office at Pacific Environmental Solutions, where the nameplate on my door read Emma Harris, Director of Renewable Energy Innovation. The promotion I had once been denied had led to an even more prestigious position, heading a groundbreaking project on sustainable urban development. The past half year had brought tremendous change both professionally and personally. My work had flourished without the constant undermining from Victoria. My colleagues, now aware of what had happened, had rallied around me with support and new collaboration opportunities. My supervisor had become a mentor, encouraging me to publish research that was gaining recognition in environmental engineering circles. More surprising was my personal life. Dr. Alex Martinez, a renewable energy researcher who had defended my work during the false allegations, had asked me to dinner in February. What started as professional respect had grown into something deeper. At 31, Alex was thoughtful and genuine, with none of the manipulation I'd experienced in past relationships. My living situation had also improved dramatically. With my career on solid footing, I had purchased a modernist house in the Hollywood Hills with stunning city views. Helen had decided to move into the guest house on my property, giving us both independence while maintaining our close relationship. The family landscape had shifted fundamentally. Marcus's divorce from Victoria had been finalized quickly, expedited by the mountain of evidence and Victoria's increasingly erratic behavior when confronted with truth. The Chin family had protected their business interests, conducting a thorough audit to ensure no lasting damage had been done to their operations. My father had surprised everyone by finding his voice after decades of passivity. He had moved out of the family home in March, renting a condo in Manhattan Beach while he and Catherine attempted intensive marriage counseling. Their future remained uncertain, but he had established clear boundaries for the first time in their relationship. Catherine's journey had been more complicated. Initially, she had doubled down on defending Victoria, accusing me of exaggerating evidence and destroying the family. But as more details emerged, including Victoria's recorded comments mocking her behind her back, Catherine had been forced to confront her own role in creating the toxic family dynamic. Our relationship remained strained, limited to occasional supervised meetings with our family therapist, where conversations focused on understanding rather than blame. The most unexpected development had come in April when I received an email from Victoria. After the Christmas Eve revelation, she had disappeared from Los Angeles, reportedly staying with friends in New York while dealing with the divorce proceedings. Her message was brief but shocking. "I've been in therapy for 4 months. My psychiatrist thinks I have narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial traits. I don't know if I agree with the diagnosis, but I'm trying to understand what happened. If you're willing to talk, I'd like to try to make amends. I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try to understand why I did it." After extensive consultation with Dr. Brennan and careful consideration, I had responded cautiously. We had exchanged a few messages since, each revealing a Victoria I had never known, uncertain, vulnerable, and possibly for the first time in her life, honest about her limitations. We had agreed to attempt a supervised conversation the following month, with both our therapists present, to begin what would undoubtedly be a long and difficult process of understanding our shared past and whether any form of healthy relationship was possible. Family therapy had also begun, revealing the generational patterns of dysfunction that stretched back decades. Our maternal grandmother had played favorites with her daughters, just as Catherine had with us, creating a cycle of competition and resentment that had poisoned multiple generations. Catherine was slowly, painfully beginning to acknowledge her role and the damage it had caused to both her daughters and her marriage. On a warm Sunday evening in June, I hosted a dinner gathering at my new home. The table on my hillside deck was set for 6. Helen, Jennifer, who had become one of my closest friends, Alex, my supervisor Lisa, and her husband David, and me. These people represented my chosen family, the supportive connections I had built while freeing myself from toxic dynamics. As we enjoyed dessert and coffee under the string lights with the city sparkling below us, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. "I'd like to make a toast," I said, raising my glass. The conversation quieted as my guests turned attentive faces toward me. To the family who learned that love is defined by truth and support, not manipulation and control. Helen's eyes glistened with unshed tears as she recognized the words, a reclaiming of the concept of family that had been so distorted in my childhood. The following morning, I received a notification about Victoria's court appearance for restitution related to the financial theft and identity fraud. My attorney had advised me to attend, but after careful consideration, I declined. My presence wasn't necessary for justice to be served, and my energy was better spent building my new life than revisiting past pain. As I prepared for my day at the office, reviewing plans for a major solar installation project, I thought about the generations of women in my family who had been trapped in cycles of competition, favoritism, and resentment. For perhaps the first time in our family history, that cycle had been broken. The cost had been high, relationships damaged, painful truths exposed, a family structure completely reorganized. But the freedom on the other side was invaluable. True justice, I had come to understand, wasn't about punishing Victoria or seeing her suffer. It was about freeing myself and others from toxic patterns and creating space for authentic relationships built on mutual respect rather than manipulation. The ultimate victory wasn't defeating my sister, but refusing to participate in a destructive game that had no real winners, only varying degrees of damage. As summer bloomed in Los Angeles, so did my conviction that the future would be fundamentally different from the past. The journey of healing had only begun for me and my family, but for the first time, we were walking in the light of truth rather than the shadows of secrets and lies. I know many of you have experienced family betrayal or discovered painful truths about those you trusted most. If my story has resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? What helped you move forward after betrayal? Remember that breaking toxic family cycles isn't selfish. It's an act of courage that can heal generations to come. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when it comes from family. Thank you for listening to my story. Here's to truth, healing, and the courage to create the family we deserve, whether born or chosen.